Hello, and welcome back to Life Lessons with Mr. D. We're continuing our talk about college, and now we're looking at classes and social life. And think of this as your survival guide to doing well in college. So, first things, classes are very different from they are in high school. Classes are much shorter, and they're measured in hours per week. So if someone says, I'm taking 15 hours in college, they don't mean they're taking 15 hours over the course of a semester, or they're taking 15 hours every day. They mean each week they're in class for 15 hours. And this looks like typically a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class and a Tuesday, Thursday class. Most classes are 3-hour classes, which means that they would go Monday, Wednesday, Friday for an hour, or they would go Tuesday, Thursday for an hour and a half. There's exceptions. Some schools do only hour and a half classes, so it varies a little bit, but that's the general idea. Full-time classes is 12 hours. Maximum time classes is 18 hours. And of course, the average in the middle would be 15 hours. So if you're in school for 15 hours a week and you go Monday through Friday, that means you're in school for 3 hours a day. I'll let that sink in. 3 hours a day. That's a lot less than you're in school in high school. So what do you do with all the time? Well, there's a lot less class time, but there is a lot more to do outside of class. In college, there's no classwork, there's no busy work. If you're in class, you're learning. If you're not learning, then class is over. Professors don't schedule classes that they don't need. You're not compelled to be there just because someone said you have to be there. If you have class, the professor is teaching you something, which means that all your own work happens elsewhere. So the idea is 1 credit hour, so that 3-hour class would be 3 credit hours, means twice as much outside of class time. 1 credit hour is 2 study hours, and those study hours are reviewing the lecture, making sure you understand the content, reading chapters in the book, or reading entire books. Their time spent doing your own research, their time spent writing papers, their time spent actually studying. And I know a lot of people in high school don't really study for the sake of studying. You'll cram before a test, but you don't actually study something. In college, you have to actually study because there's so much information. You can't learn it all in the limited class time that you have. Because everyone in college is an adult, the idea that is, if you're told to do something, you're going to do it. If you're told to read a chapter, you read a chapter. If you're told to study something, then you study it. And you come to the professor with questions, not just be spoon-fed everything you need to know. Because you will be tested over things that have never been talked about in class. I promise you, I guarantee it will happen. So you have to study on your own. That's why a lot of people go to the library so often in college, because you're working on practicing that study skill. You're working on an environment in which you can study. Now, a lot of freshman classes are morning classes, but you will have some freedom in terms of your schedule, more freedom than you've had before. So some people like to schedule a lot of morning classes, and then by the time lunch rolls around, they're done with all their classes, and then they study from lunchtime until dinner time, and by dinner, they're done with all of their school stuff and they have their evenings free, which is something that most of you are probably not used to. Some people schedule all of their classes on a few days of the week, so the other days they can work. That usually works out pretty well, but those people have a lot more time conflicts, and so they have to be even better at managing their time. My recommendation is that you schedule out your study time just like it's a class. You set a certain time on a certain day, every day, to study, to read, to research, to write papers, to prepare for tests. and you treat that like it's class time. If you think I'm going to study when I get around to it, then you won't have enough time. Because while you're in school for way less, you're in class for way less, the homework is going to be even more homework than what you're accustomed to. The difference is in high school, you're in class 7 or 8 hours a day and you have tons of homework. In college, you're in class 3 hours a day and you have tons of homework. So if you plan your time well and you really work diligently, you will have more free time in college, even with all of the extra work. It's important that you find a study system, a study location, and a study time that works for you. A time that's free of distractions, a time that's free of other people interrupting you. If you take classes online, this is really hard. This is really hard to do that, as so many of you know. So it's when you go to college, you need to think about what works well. The default place to study is your dorm room, but your dorm room has things like a bed and snacks, right? And it's very distracting. So studying elsewhere, like in a library or some sort of study area, is often better. When you're taking classes, you should start exploring your major as soon as you can, because it would be really bad if you wait until you graduated to realize you don't particularly like that career field. So work on studying that as early in your degree process as possible, and take into account that some of the intro classes may be a little bit boring, even if you like the field. The more you explore the field, the more exposure you get, the more experience you get, the more you'll know if you like it or if you don't, and the easier it will be to change. The longer you wait, the harder it is to change course. Now, unlike high school, your syllabus in college is really important. In high school, most syllabi kind of give you an overview of the class and talk about some policies, but they're not that vital. But in college, they're going to give you a very clear schedule as to what happens when and where. They're going to tell you when the tests are. And if you don't read that, you won't be prepared, because there's not a lot of time spent on general announcements. In my freshman year, there were a number of times in which there was a test I was not mentally prepared for because I didn't know it was coming. I spent time studying, but I didn't really keep track of my syllabus. And so I was surprised when it was the day of a test. I even had one professor that assigned an entire research paper from the syllabus, never spoke about it once in class. I was shocked when the professor just said one day, out of the blue, at least to me, "I'll take your papers now." And it seemed like everyone in the class was pulling their paper out and handing it in. And I looked at the person next to me and I said, what, what are we doing? And they said, we're turning in our paper. And I said, which paper is this? And they looked at me like I was an idiot. And they said, the one from the syllabus? And I'm like, oh, the one from the syllabus I didn't read. Yeah. So I had to go to the professor, hat in hand, and say, I really like your class. I try really hard. I study and do the reading. All of these things were true. But I don't have my research paper for you. Is there any way that I can bring it to you a little bit later today? And the professor took mercy on me and said, yes, that would be fine. Get it to me later today. So I rushed out of that class, skipped lunch, hammered out a really quick paper. Probably not my best work, but it was certainly better than nothing. Raced over to that professor's office and turned it in. I was so grateful that she accepted it. That is not a normal thing, because deadlines in college are incredibly firm deadlines. Most of you do not have any experience with a firm deadline, where a deadline is the deadline and there are no exceptions. But in college, there is no late work, there is no makeup work, there is no excuses. You're in class or you're in the hospital, and literally nothing aside from that is going to be a cause for turning something in late or missing class or something like that. So be aware, if you miss something, it's a big deal. Another story, I was taking a music theory class. I loved the class. I loved the professor. I was very good at it. I was very involved. I was on top of all my homework. But one day I overslept. I stayed up late working the night before, missed my alarm, overslept, and I missed a test. And to show you how big of a deal it was, one of my classmates saw me afterwards and they were freaking out for me because I missed the test. I went to the professor's office after class or later on in the day, and I said, I'm very sorry I missed your test. It was not my intention. I didn't do it on purpose. I really like your class. I really want to do well. Is there anything at all that I can do to make up for the fact that I missed the test today? And the professor looked at me with no sarcasm or malice and just said, yes, do better on the next test. I had no words. I was not used to that happening because in high school there are so many allowances, there are so many exceptions and extensions, but that is not the case in college. So you need to be very ready for that. And like I said before, studying is totally mandatory because you won't learn everything you need to learn. The professor will give you an assigned reading, and it's not a recommendation, it is a requirement because if they tell you to read it, it's going to be on the test, and they're probably not going to talk about it. The good news is there are very few assignments. Most of college is just learning things. There were a number of classes that I took in which we just had a couple of grades. Test, paper. There were several that I took that had a paper, a test, a paper, a test. Those were the only grades for the entire class. Each one was 25%. So don't screw up on them because they're pretty important. That worked really well for me because I've always hated busy work. But the idea that like every assignment was important and there were very few of them, so you spend a lot of time on them, that made sense to me. And that was my grades in college were even better than my grades in high school because of that. You might be the same way. If you really, really hate busy work, then the type of assignments you have in college will probably be better for you. Now, it's also important to keep in mind that your classes are structured as semesters. There are no year-long classes in college. There are sometimes classes that have a part one and a part two, and each one is each a semester, but classes in college, pretty much as a rule, are a semester long, unless you're taking something like summer school. So keep that in mind that everything that you're learning for that particular year class starts in September and ends in December, or starts in January and ends in May. So there's not a lot of time for extra assignments. And one of the other big things that you're going to be doing in terms of the work in college is research papers. Almost every class will ask you to do research, and many of those classes will ask you to write a paper about it. So we could get into an entirely long conversation about research papers, but the short answer is start them early, do a lot of outlining, read from a lot of sources, and do not plagiarize. Instead, blend the information from many, many sources and follow your own outline. Um, if you need help with research paper structure at some point in time, we can have a conversation. You can put your question in the chat, and I'll try to help you out there. In terms of the classes, you're going to want to talk to the professors during office hours or email them with questions, unless they just open the floor to questions. A lot of professors have a strict um, method that they go through when they teach, and they're teaching very fast. And so don't interrupt them unless they open the floor for questions, but take note of your questions and contact them. Most professors really don't mind people coming and visiting with them during their office hours, and each professor will tell you what their office hours are in their syllabus. It is also to your advantage if you do a little homework about your classes to find out what the workload is like. Which books are required? Which books are recommended but not really required? And most syllabi are available online. You can access them before you even sign up for the class. If you know anyone who's already taken the class, talk to them if you can. That's really going to give you a good idea as to what's going on with the class. Some classes use ebooks or subscriptions to software. Other classes use textbooks or workbooks. Some classes use a combination of those, so you're going to want to investigate that as well. If you're using standard books that can be purchased, from a bookstore, you can purchase them at the college bookstore. Basically, every college has a bookstore, and you can buy them from the bookstore. That's totally fine. One of the conveniences of the bookstore is they know exactly which class you're taking because you can show them your schedule, and they make sure that you get the exact right book. The downside of the school bookstore is that it's almost always more expensive than buying it somewhere else, with the exception of some random online places will mark books up really expensive. But the campus bookstore is usually not the cheapest. So get used books if you can. If they permit you to get a used book, then get that. But make sure it's the same edition as the book that you're supposed to have, because often professors will not really permit you to use another edition. It's missing information or it's a little bit different. Um, if you can borrow it from someone else, that's really good. Some schools allow you to rent books, which is great. If it's a class that's not towards your major and you're never going to use the book again, try to borrow it, try to rent it, because you're not going to need to keep it. And even though you can sell books back to a bookstore, they sell them back at such a small amount that it's almost not worth it. You'll buy a book for $100 and sell it back for 10 or 20. The used book is going to cost 50 or 60. So the school makes a ton of money on selling used books because they buy them from students for such a small amount. The really savvy students will try to borrow and trade books with other people. And when I was in college, I tried to find people who had already taken the classes I was taking and borrow their books or offer to buy the book from them. I would buy the book from them for more than the bookstore would pay them. So they were getting more money. They were getting a better deal. But because that was way less than what the bookstore would charge me, I was saving a ton of money. So everyone's happy. I mean, except the bookstore. They're not happy. But you and the other student are happy. So that's a great way to do it. Or if you find someone who's taking a class that you've already taken, and they've taken a class that you need to take, you can even trade books with them. Hey, I will loan you this government book if you loan me that English book. And at the end, you just decide, do you keep your original book or do you keep your second book? In any case, it's a lot cheaper. Now, software makes this a little bit harder because often that's a subscription. That's a one-time use thing. There's not a lot of options for that except shopping online and trying to find the cheapest version. And really, shopping online and trying to find the cheapest version is a good route for all of this, but borrowing is free, and that's always cheaper. In terms of the social life, you're going to meet a lot of people. Some are going to have really different backgrounds. Some are going to have different beliefs, different personalities, different worldviews. You're not going to agree with everyone. Don't try. But you do need to be kind to everyone. Even if someone is so drastically different from you that you find their very thoughts to be offensive, you know what? They're still a person. And you can still be kind and respectful and considerate to the person, even if you may disagree with some of their viewpoints and ideas. Revolutionary, I know, but it's good advice to live on. In terms of group, there's a huge pressure in college to group up. A lot of colleges have a designated time where all of the freshmen try to join organizations and all the organizations try to recruit freshmen. There's a lot of pressure to do that and to join a group or certain groups. Don't push yourself. Take your time. Fraternities and sororities, things that we call Greek life that are identified with Greek letters, they're good for some people, but it's not mandatory. And it's not something that works for everybody. Sometimes these organizations can be really focused on partying, really focused on negative social aspects, focused on shaming people into changing their lifestyle to be a certain thing, or about excluding and shaming others. Some of them can be enormously cliquish. And again, This is not all of them. But there are many schools in which there is kind of a self-destructive, exclusionary, cliquish culture that is sort of, encouraged by their campus organizations. So be wary, be cautious. A lot of these also try to exert some sort of force in your life. They make you pay dues, they make you be involved in a certain number of events, and even pressure you to not do certain things or be around certain people or go to certain events that other organizations do. Again, not all of them, but some of them. So be aware of your surroundings and be aware of which part of the social scene you're in and which groups you choose to join. If you really want to join a fraternity or sorority group, you can try finding some that are not just social. They're organized around community service or maybe an honor society or a specific achievement group or a career field or a certain type of interest. In addition to fraternities and sororities, there's also a ton of other campus organizations that are clubs that are based on an interest or a shared hobby or almost anything. The bigger the school, the more likely there is that there's a group focused on an interest that you hold. Probably even the smallest schools are still going to have some sort of organization that is really focused around something that you're interested in. And this is beyond taking classes toward that. This is just completely extracurricular stuff. Finding a group that shares your interests is almost always better than changing yourself to fit the interests or tastes of another group. Obviously, we will want to learn new things. Obviously, we want to be open to new experiences. But the idea of you need to fit in with a certain group often does not result in a positive change for you. It's also really great to make friends with people who are in your major because they have shared interests with you. You're kind of on the same sort of path in life toward your degree. And in terms of, what you want out of life, it's more likely to be similar there. Making friends with people in your dorm is good too because they're literally your neighbors. So if you need to borrow something, if you need a favor and you're already friends with them, they live right next to you or live in the same room as you, you already have that established friendship. And no matter how you make friends, just understand that most often friendships do not happen quickly. They develop over time. In my life, most of the friendships that I made very quickly could also end very quickly. But the friendships that I developed over time and really worked toward, those are the ones that stuck around for a long time, that I still have today. Now, everyone knows about the college party scene. It's in every movie or show about college. It's just basically synonymous with college. But I want to tell you, you shouldn't feel like you have to take part in that. You shouldn't feel like that is a part of college for you. That is a part of the college experience for some people, but not everyone. Partying, drinking, drugs, sex, they're seen as just like that's what people do in college. But really and truly, a lot of that just ruins people's lives. It just gives you so many things to regret, and it takes a lot of the joy out of an otherwise great experience. I saw so many people's lives ruined because of this stuff. Uh, I saw a salutatorian of my high school get so into the drug scene, he just fried his brain and you couldn't even carry on a conversation with him. My roommate, who was really good friends with me, woke up in the middle of the night wanting to kill me because he dreamt something really weird in his drug-addled hallucinations. These are not good choices. These are not things that you should do. And if you feel like you need to do that to fit in with people, they aren't the people you should be fitting in with. Instead, you should have admirable relationships. And what I mean by that is you should be friends with and you should be around people who you admire, people who you want to be like. I've heard it said that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. The average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I don't know if that's exactly true, but I think the idea is the people you are around will influence you, period, the end. They will. They will influence you. And depending on the type of person they are and the type of person you are, they might influence you positively or they might influence you negatively. They might lead you to a bad place. You're going to have to use good judgment. Most of you know right from wrong. You don't have to experiment, explore to figure out what is right and wrong. You probably know it. And if you don't know right from wrong, find someone in your life that you trust to know right from wrong and spend time around them and talk to them. People say that college is a place where you find yourself, but that implies that you're lost. It implies that somehow you aren't yourself. I think that instead, we need to go through what Robert Brault, one of my favorite poets, says, is that he says, never mind searching for who you are, search for the person you aspire to be. That means work to become the best version of the person you are and not just shake things up and find a different you. Find the best you possible. And I think that the social scene in college is a really good place for that. The friendships that I made in college are friendships that I still have to this day. And it didn't require me compromising my integrity or my character to do so. I can tell you, 100% honesty, I have never smoked anything. I've never done illegal drugs, not even marijuana, ever. I've never been drunk. And the only person I've had sex with is my wife. And you know what? I don't live an empty life. I've had tons of amazing experiences, and I don't regret any of those decisions ever because inevitably, most of those choices ultimately lead to regret. I have so few regrets from my college times because very rarely did I do things that were grossly out of my character. I'm not trying to say I'm perfect. I definitely did make mistakes. But in this area, I chose to draw a really hard line not to cross. And it was not easy. It was not easy. But I'm so grateful that I put the work in to do it. It has made all the difference. So I ask you to make smart choices about where you go, what you do, and who you're with. Do not put yourself in a situation where it's going to easily compromise you. Do not put yourself in a high risk situation. Be on your guard and be around people who are going to be on their guard for you. So in case you miss something, in case you're unaware of something, they are making sure that you're okay. And I don't just mean if you're going to get drunk, be around people who care about you. No, no, no. Don't put yourself in that situation to start with and be around other people who are also going to not put themselves in that situation. You're going to need to protect yourself, your property, your information from people who are going to try to take advantage of you, from people who are going to try to manipulate you, from people who are going to try to pressure you into doing things that are against your best interest. These people are ultimately acting selfishly, and you are going to be the victim. Whether unintended or intended, you will end up being the victim. So you need to be mindful of that. And even more than that, you need to protect your character and your integrity. The choices you make during the hard times are going to help define who you are. This is very, very important. So let's get a little bit lighter and talk about what happens when you get there. So, the first few weeks of college, you're going to have some type of orientation. You're going to want to attend it. Be nice, meet people, um, find out who's in your dorm area. They're going to be your neighbors, so be a good neighbor. Don't skip your classes. You pay a lot of money for college classes. You should definitely go to all of them. Wake up early, have a good breakfast. Make sure you know how to get from class to class to class, especially if it's a big campus. You might need to ride a bike, you might need to drive, you might need to take the bus from one class to another, depending on what sort of campus layout you have. And like I said before, this is a good chance to start establishing some good habits that are going to chart who you are as a person. That what you establish with the fresh start that is college can be the new direction that you go in to make yourself an even better version of who you are. Now, that wraps up our talk about college. I'm sure you're going to have some questions. Feel free to carry on a conversation with me in the comments, and I'd love to try to help guide you in the right direction. Our next one is going to be life lessons, talking about the future. It's a short session, but it's going to have a lot of stuff into it. I look forward to seeing you then.